Hi, everybody. Welcome to a new edition of Let's Talk About Education with Antonio Corrales. As you may know, I'm an educator, an entrepreneur, and a professor at the University of Houston Clear Lake. My main goal is to introduce you to pioneers in the field of education and to let you know about topics that you may be aware of that you may be interested in. Today, we have the honor to have with us Dr. Dawn Hine. She's a seasoned educator, seasoned school counselor, and somebody who's going to be talking to us today about how to create trusting relationship with students. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me here. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely.
It's been a long, cold, lonely winter. Little darling, it feels like years since it's been here. Here comes the sun.
All right, Dr. Han, why don't we start by letting you introduce yourself to the audience and kind of letting us know how do you get to where you are in your career?
Okay, so I have been in education for 18 years now. I started off as an elementary school teacher. I taught fourth grade English language arts. I taught third grade self-contained. I've taught GT, gifted and talented. So my teaching experience it's all been elementary, but it's been a varied experience in elementary. And then at some point in my elementary years, I got the hankering for wanting to do more. And I had a particular student who just really tugged at my heart. He was one of those hard to love kids who every single day I knew that I was going to have to wrestle him in some way, whether it was academically or emotionally. I knew that we were going to get into an argument some way, and I didn't like that. And one day I pulled him aside and we just started talking, and he told me about his home life and how hard it was, and I wanted to do more for him, and I knew that I couldn't do those things for him as his classroom teacher. So I had a good talk with a good friend of mine, and she suggested that I look into counseling, and I started doing some research and thought to myself, I could see myself doing this. And so I started working on my master's program, and here we are 12 years later. I am a school counselor. So, yeah.
That is fantastic. Now, one of the things that research is telling us constantly is that establishing effective and trusting relationships is essential to increase academic performance. As you and I know, job security for school administrators and teachers and superintendent for nowadays depends a lot of how the students perform in their academics and in their standardized testing.
Right.
But to do that, we go back to establishing trust and effective relationship.
Yes.
How can we do that? What are the steps? What are the key points to really establishing a relationship? We hear that over and over again. Oh, you need to establish a relationship.
But how?
For simple terms, how do we do it?
I think one of the key points to remember is that relationships begin from the moment that student, the moment that you know that student is a part of your school. Not necessarily a part of your community, or a part of your class, not necessarily a part of your grade level, but the moment you realize that student is a part of your school family, no matter what grade level they're in, no matter what their label is, you can begin that trusting relationship right then and there. And once you find out what grade level they're in or whose class they're in, then you can deepen that relationship. But the moment you find out they're one of your students at your school, you can begin that relationship just by saying, hey, I'm so glad you're going to be at my school this year. I can't wait to see you in the hallways.
Something positive.
Absolutely. Keep it positive. Welcoming, because if that kiddo is coming to your school, and who knows why they've left their former school, or maybe they're a brand new kindergartner or a new sixth grader or a new freshman, but they're new to your school, there's going to be some anxiety on their part. There's got to be a lot of nervousness. There's probably some worry about, are people going to like me? Are people going to accept me? No matter if they're 5 or 15. So if they're meeting you and you are the first person they have met who is representing their new school, you are setting the tone for everybody else who follows after you that they meet. And so I think that is one of the key things that we have to remember.
So is there a systemic way that you do it? Because I know you have been really effective, obviously, in your career, and you have been really successful. Is there a success formula for especially for new teachers or new administrators who are there. We're gonna go back. We're gonna talk about administrators in a little bit, but mostly for teachers at this point. What are the steps that you recommend them to do to, establish that effective relationship, which at the end is gonna help out in classroom behavior and
Absolutely.
academic.
So for a brand new first year teacher, I would say the moment you get your roster, which is usually the maybe a first few days before school starts. The moment you get that roster, you start looking up phone numbers and addresses, and you start making phone calls to those families and saying, hey Joey, you're going to be in my class this year, and I am so excited. I can't wait to see what you accomplish this year. Doesn't matter.
Be proactive and
Be proactive.
Take the off. Okay.
Absolutely. Because thinking about little Joey, well, he might not be little. He's 5, he's 15. Joey is going to be impressed that you called for him, that you didn't worry about what his reputation might have been. You're excited that he's in your class. And he's going to work for you because now he knows automatically that you like him. And if he doesn't know that, he's at least intrigued, which will help him with his behavior in your classroom. So as soon as you know who's in your classroom, you start making contact. The first day of school, let's fast forward to the first day of school. When those kiddos walk into your classroom, be happy, be excited about them coming into your classroom. Again, doesn't matter what level they're in, whether they're elementary, middle, or high school. Be excited. Greet your kids by name. Do some kind of personal touch, but ask for permission. A handshake, a high five, a hug. If they don't want anything, that's okay. A fist bump, just something just to let them know, hey, I see you, I acknowledge you, and I'm glad that you're here. And then that first week of school is so incredibly important in building relationships, getting to know kids on a personal level. If you invest that first week of school on a personal level and not so much worry about academics, you'll gain that academic time back later on in the school year.
Let me follow up on that. How do you do it? How do you get to know students' background, especially when you're dealing with, for example, with underrepresented students, minority students, economically disadvantaged students? How do you establish that trusting? How do you gather information in regards to their background or the struggles that they may go into? Ruby Paynes talks a lot about cycle of poverty, but from our new teacher or even for an experienced teacher, sometimes there's a struggle with the communication, especially when you're dealing with middle schoolers or teenagers who start getting more isolated. How to break that ice and starting from the classroom and making sure that you collect that data that may be really important for you to when having to correct assignments or incorporate that students in different tasks, because now I don't know, David, for example, doesn't usually have breakfast, or David's only is son of a single mother. How do you establish that connection and be able to gather that data, that information from the student?
So I think one really great way to do that is to make sure that the students know about you.
Okay.
So why would they ever offer information about their personal home life if I, as their teacher, am not willing to do the same? So having pictures of yourself and your family around your classroom is a really great way to let them know that you're a human person.
That's a good tip.
That you have interests outside of the school building, that you don't live at the school like so many of our students think that we do. Also, that first week of school, or those first couple of weeks of school, do an interest inventory with your students, a getting to know you sheet. Who lives at your house? How many pets do you have? How many brothers and sisters do you have? What's your greatest fear?
And you can do that regardless of the age, right?
Exactly. You can totally do that.
Because sometimes it's not cool, but you can do it like...
But you can write it down, and you can tell the kids, hey, this is just a way for me to get to know you. If there's anything that you want me to know, you can turn it into a journal assignment. What's one thing you wish I knew about you? And have them do a free write. That's something that kids can do very easily.
Correct.
Class meetings or family meetings or morning meetings are another great way to get information from kiddos. Doing them a few times a week. Daily is really best practice, but I know that we don't always have time for that. So even if it's 2 to 3 times a week, that will help open up lines of communication, and you really get to know kids that way. So there are a lot of different ways that teachers can get that information from their kiddos. But the most important piece of that is that the teacher has to be willing to share that information about themselves, because when the teacher is willing to share that information, then kids will be more likely. Doesn't matter if they come from homes of affluence or if they come from homes of poverty.
Correct.
If the teacher is willing to open up and is authentic about it, then the kids will be willing to
Taking the
open
first step. That makes a lot of
Mhm.
sense. Now let's talk a little bit about administrators though, and in the role
Yeah.
that, because I consider counselors somehow a school administrators. Even though, like I said, I'm a big advocate for counselors, and I believe that we should have more counselors in schools. But let's talk about the role of school administrators in general, establishing those trusting,
Yes.
positive relationship. We go back to research and we say, we understand that those relationships are essential to produce academic performance, and of course to control, have a good behavioral in school, etc. What do you recommend to administrators to establish a relationship, especially when dealing with large campuses? When you have a campus 2,000, 3,000
Absolutely.
students, it may become a little struggle.
Right.
And so sometimes administrators tend to focus more on the relation with the teachers.
Mhm.
So in your perspective, having this many years as a counselor, what do you recommend in that area?
I think it's important for the administrator to be a model. You, as an educator, I can't be expected to build relationships with my students if my administrator is not willing to build relationships with me and also my students. So, excuse me. I think a great idea for an administrator to do is to be out in the hallways. A great administrator should not be behind closed doors the entire day.
All right.
People should be able to know who the principal of the campus is or the APs of the campus, and not confuse me as the counselor, because I'm always out with students, as the principal.
Correct. Because that could be against your job, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I think that if a principal or an assistant principal is out in the hallways and they are engaging with students, hey, how are you doing? Hey, great game yesterday. Just conversing with the kiddos, that is a great way for the administrator to build relationships with those kids, because when things get really tough, those kids are going to turn to the people that they feel safe with. And that might be the administrator, and that's okay. And when things, when behavior goes bad and a kid has done something really wrong, and that administrator knows things about that kiddo, knows about their home life, knows about the struggles that they're dealing with, then that administrator can go to bat for that kid, which is also really important. So I think one of the best things an administrator can do is to be a really great model of engaging with the kids and the staff and the parents and the community. My current principal right now does a weekly call out every single
We call out to
Sunday
each one of the students?
to the staff.
To the
I'm
staff.
sorry, not to the staff, to the families. She records a message. It goes out on Sundays at 6 p.m. And everybody knows at 6 p.m. when our phone rings, it's our campus
Because
principal.
not many of them may have internet or may not have emails
Absolutely.
or whatever, no?
Absolutely. So that call out, it does go to all of our phones, but it also comes across as an email too, and it's included in a newsletter.
Perfect.
So she covers all bases there, and I think that's another really great way to build relationships with families, because we're letting them know what's going on our campus, and it's a great thing.
That's fantastic. That's a really good tip. What about bullying though? And I know it's a topic in itself, but I want to
Yes.
cover it really quick with you, because I know you have experience in that. What are your recommendations to deal with bullying? It's a really common topic nowadays, and when I'm in schools all the time, and when I talk to principals and superintendents and teachers, the terminology per se maybe sometimes confusing.
Yes.
And so sometimes we may be calling something bullying when it's an aggression,
Right. Or
excuse me,
teasing.
or teasing. And so, what is your perspective about bullying? What effective ways to combat it, regardless of the age?
I think one of the most effective ways is education. You're right that the term bullying I think it's overused now. Every little thing is called bullying. I have kids who come to my office and they say, Dr. Hahn, so-and-so is bullying me. And I say, okay, talk to me. Tell me.
Yeah, but when you talk about those students that were going to you and say, okay, so and so is bullying me, how do you address that? How do you determine, okay, this is really bullying, or conceptually they have a mistake?
Right. So I will, when a kiddo comes to me and says that, I say, okay, so tell me what's going on. What about this tells you that it's bullying? Or what about this makes you feel like you're getting bullied?
Correct.
And so I ask them to tell me their story. And I reiterate their story to them. I make sure that I'm understanding what's going on. And when I think about bullying, the old definition was that it was repeated. It happened many times. There was intent to harm, and there was an imbalance of power. But in the past year, that definition has changed. It doesn't necessarily have to be repeated. It can just be one really bad experience to make it bullying. And so
That's interesting.
right, and it is, and it kind of, for me, muddies the waters even more so than what it was.
Well, it makes the work for administrators and counselors a little harder in terms of
It does.
how to navigate those waters. No?
It does. It really does. And so one of the things that I always ask kids is, okay, this person that you feel like is bullying you, do you think that they're doing these things to hurt you? Or do you think they're doing these things because they're trying to joke around? What do you think? Because I want to know what the kid thinks. I don't want to put an idea in their mind that's not there. And a lot of times the kids will say, well, they were just joking around. I mean, they were joking around with everybody. Okay, well, if they're joking around and you don't like it, what are some things that we can do to get this person to stop? So then I try to empower them and give them some tools and strategies to be able to stand up for themselves and advocate for themselves, because I think that's also really important when we're talking about bullying.
A good way to stop it, starting from this student itself.
Right. Now that doesn't mean that I'm putting it all back on the student.
Correct.
I will always ask them, okay, so now that you've learned some tips and tools and we have practiced, I make sure that we practice and we use our strong voice. So I make sure we practice. And after all of that is said and done, I say, okay, you know how to handle this, but if you don't feel comfortable handling this, we can handle it a few different ways. You can handle it on your own. You and I can handle it together. Or I can talk to that student. What's your choice? And I let them decide. And more times than not, I have kids saying, I want to handle it myself. Awesome. Go for it. Let me know how it turns out. If it doesn't turn out the way you want it to, come back and see me and we'll figure out, we'll do something else. But I think a big piece of that is education and empowering our kids. Teaching them the difference between bullying and conflict, because there is a clear difference. Having them practice that on a regular basis. Giving them the words to use to stand up for themselves. And then letting them know that just because somebody's not bullying them personally, if they see somebody else getting bullied, they have the power to be an upstander instead of a bystander. And when I say upstander, I mean you are going to that person who's bullying and you say, not okay. And you take that person away and you walk them to a safe place, to a safe adult. Of course, that's easier said than done for kiddos. But they can do it, and they do it. When they feel empowered and they feel strong enough and confident in themselves, they do it, and they make sure that they're being upstanders.
That is awesome. Now I want to talk about the role of school counselors in schools, but before that, I want to close up the topic that you were talking about, establishing trust and relationship. How do one of the biggest assumptions out there is that when you're talking about urban schools or almost any school nowadays, is that sometimes when you have high level of poverty or high level of minority students, the work of the teachers and the work of the students is harder, and they receive the same compensation.
Right.
And yes, they love the students, but that's one of the arguments. How do these professionals who work in a school with high levels of poverty and high levels of minority students who may be experiencing, behavioral issues and different kinds of issues. How do make sure that they are able to establish those relationships and make controlling behavior in a way that they can be effective in delivering instruction and running the school.
I think again that goes back to those first few days of school, those first few weeks of school. One of the beautiful things about my career is that I have worked in Title I schools and I've worked in schools of affluence, and you can't tell me that the kids are different, because they're not. One might have more money than the other, but that's about the only difference. And they might have more parental support than the other, but the problems are still the same. My kids still come to school. I still have kids coming to school who haven't eaten breakfast. I still have kids coming to school who don't have much food in the house. I still have kids who come to school whose parents are addicted to drugs or domestic violence going on, and that's in my school of affluence. Same problems as the school of poverty that I worked in. And so building those relationships in a school that has a high level of poverty, you might have to work harder and longer in building those relationships, but the steps are still the same.
Exactly.
As soon as you know that kiddo, is in your school, in your grade level, in your classroom, you start building that relationship. Let's say it's a kid with less than desirable behaviors. You see them in the hallway, you know that they are in the grade level below you and they are coming up. Why not stop at them in the hallway and say, hey, I hear you're going to be in 5th grade next year. I can't wait to see you in my classroom. I have heard such wonderful things about you. Doesn't matter that everybody knows them as the bad kid.
Yeah.
What matters is what that kid thinks about himself and what he thinks you think about him. And when that kid walks into your classroom in 5th grade, he's going to say, man, I'm excited that I'm in so-and-so's class.
So you're saying that establishing those relationships, even though it's a terminology that people use over and over again, and research shows that it's essential for educators in those environments to have a well management of behavior.
Yes,
and,
it is vital to have a trusting relationship with those kiddos, because that kid might not behave for anybody else, but because they know that you love them, they're going to make sure that they're on their A game in your classroom.
Correct.
I've seen it happen in my own classroom. I had a student early in my career who was identified as emotionally disturbed. I had no idea she was identified as emotionally disturbed until an incident happened, and that incident did not happen in my classroom. And she had been in my class for 6 months before that happened. She came into my classroom, she was a model student, but she was a model student because I expected that of her. And she knew that when she walked into my classroom, she was loved. She knew she was respected. Didn't matter that she may have done disrespectful things to everybody else. When she walked into my classroom, I respected her, and she knew that, so she respected me.
that is good. Now, before we close the interview, I wanna go to a topic that then I become really passionate about because of the mental health debate in the nation, and it really bothers me that school counselors are not mandated in most states in the United States, and when you have school counselors, the student counselor ratio is really high. In other
Yes.
words, you may have one counselor for 500, 600, 700 students. For new counselors looking at us right now, or people who are educators who are planning to become
Right.
counselor in the next year, what do you recommend them to do to, number one, have a effective and good relationship with their school principals, but at the same time being able to maintain their role as a counselor and do their job? Because a lot of times when we see also school counselors, they ended up doing a lot of administrative job,
Yes.
other duties as assigned,
Yes.
and that ended up hindering their real job description, which is helping students through counseling.
Right.
And we see that ended up impacting negatively academic performance, dropout rates,
Right.
and graduation rates. So what is your perspective about that, and how can new counselors who are new in the profession and starting to work, deal with reality versus the true desire behind the profession?
Right. So I have mixed feelings on that because as a new counselor, I took the first job I could get.
Absolutely.
And I did that because I wanted to get my foot in the door. And I'm thankful that I did, because those first few years in that school, it taught me a lot about being a counselor. It was a school of very high poverty, lots of gangs all around. And I also had a lot of administrative duties. I was testing coordinator. I was RTI coordinator. I was GT coordinator. I did a lot of things that counselors aren't supposed to do. But again, it was the other duties as assigned. But because I did all of those things, I was able to hone my craft as a counselor in the sense that I knew I had a small amount of time to get some mental health guidance in. And so I would make sure that I made those minutes count. And then when I was able to leave and find a school district that supported school counselors, it made that transition that much better. It made the opportunity to find this new position. It was amazing once I got into the new school and realized what counselors should be doing. It added color to my world. It was great. So for new counselors, I don't want to say look for that dream job right away. My feeling is get your foot in the door and let that place shape you and mold you and help you figure out what you love and what you don't love, so that you can get some experience, and then you can look for that dream job in that district that will support you as a counselor.
And in regards to the specifics on how to sustain a effective and working and respectful relation with the school principal, what's your take on that?
Keep the lines of communication open. Your principal is there to support you. They are not the enemy. I think it's important to recognize, as a principal, that person is dealing with the entire school, all of the parents, the physical building, a lot of things that we don't necessarily think about. So it's important to remember that. One of the things that I always tell new counselors or graduate students is, if you've got a problem, go to your principal with the solution in hand. Here's the problem. Here's how I would like to solve it. I need your blessing, or help me problem solve this. But I think going to the principal and keeping those lines of communication open and remembering that they're not the enemy. They're there to help and they're there to support you is the best way.
That's fantastic. Well, I want to thank you one more time, Dr. Arm, for being with us today. Folks out there, remember that we have this interview and many others in Antonio Corrales' YouTube channel. Let's talk about education with Antonio Corrales and study evaluation assessment. Please stay tuned, help somebody today, and see you next time.